Welcome, everyone. Good morning to most. Good afternoon to a few. We're very pleased to have you here today. My name is Nicholas Mills. I am the Director of Labor Market Intelligence with Tourism HR Canada. We are a pan-Canadian organization with a mandate aimed at building a world-leading tourism workforce. Tourism HR Canada facilitates, coordinates, and enables human resource development and market intelligence activities aimed at supporting a globally competitive and sustainable tourism industry. At present, our team is currently engaged in a 3-year project funded by Employment and Social Development Canada's Sectoral Initiatives Program. Our project is titled Maintaining a Foundational Labor Market Forecasting and Intelligence System. Today, we are pleased to have Oliver Martin with us from 2031 Consulting to share the findings of one of THRC's first collaborations as part of this project. It's the recently released Global Survey on Perspectives of Service Delivery and Traveler Priorities. This report provides valuable global market intelligence looking at issues and travel consumer perceptions and attitudes in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. While this event is virtual, Tourism HR Canada is primarily based in Ottawa. And as such, we would like to acknowledge that across Canada, we are meeting on lands that have been inhabited by Indigenous peoples from the very beginning. Tourism HR Canada acknowledges that our offices are located on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe-Algonquin Nation, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial. We invite all attendees here today to join with us in meaningfully and thoughtfully acknowledging the oppression of the lands, cultures, and the original peoples in what we now know as Canada, and to consider how we can each move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Again, our guest today is Oliver Martin. Oliver is a partner with 2031 Consulting, Inc. It's a global management consultancy working exclusively in the travel and tourism industry. As a destination development strategist with over 20 years of experience working with leadership teams, Oliver has worked with over 70 tourism boards and organizations in various capacities around the world to develop sustainable growth plans and measure the impact. Oliver holds a graduate certificate in international marketing from the University of Toronto, an undergraduate degree in economics and international politics from Wilfrid Laurier University as well. He is a research advisor with the Adventure Travel Trade Association and chair of the board of trustees of the PATA Foundation on the executive board of the Pacific Asia Travel Association, and a board member with the social justice organization Oxfam. Oliver is based both in Toronto and Berlin. Oliver, I believe you're joining us from Berlin today. Oliver, we are very pleased to have you with us.
Hi, everyone, and good morning. And thanks, Nicholas, for the introduction. So, folks, I'm going to present the slides that you see on the screen here. It's a research-based presentation, so there's going to be a heck of a lot of numbers, and I apologize in advance for that. I'll try to keep it as entertaining as possible. I've just put a quick introduction into the chat. We're very happy to take questions and comments. I'm going to turn off my camera because I actually won't be able to see any of you. I'll turn it back on after the presentation to take questions. But again, if you have questions or comments at any time, feel free to put them into the chat, and Heather can maybe just flag it, and I'm happy to entertain them, or you can reserve them to the end. I've got around 30 or so slides, plus or minus. I'll try to keep it as tight as possible, just so we don't get into the weeds with the numbers, but we can definitely open it up to have a discussion at the end of the presentation. As Nicholas mentioned, this is a global survey of perspectives of service delivery issues, and really how that plays into the mix of how traveler consumers are planning their travel over the next 6 months to 3 years. So with that, I'm going to get into the slides. I'm just going to turn off my camera here. And Okay, so I'm going to go through the actual report itself in brief. And as Nicholas mentioned, this report is available on Tourism HR Canada's website. I'm going to talk about the methodology because it's always good to just bring that over the top to discuss how this actual research was conducted. I'm going to talk a little bit about global trends that are currently shaping tourism and really the impact of COVID on the international tourism sphere. I'm going to go into some travel ambitions or the perspectives of travelers in terms of where they want to travel to over the next 6 months to 3 years. And then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of these travel perspective issues. So really service quality and service delivery and how it plays into the mix of how travelers are perceiving an international travel vacation and how they're perceiving Canada as a travel destination. And then I'm going to go into some attitudinal profiles. So these are profiles of international travel consumers in terms of how they perceive service quality and service delivery issues and how it plays into the mix of how they choose a destination. Actually, I just realized I'm going to turn on my camera because I tend to be quite animated when I present. So I just realized I've been doing air quotes and none of you have been able to see them. All right, we're going to get into the presentation here. So without boring you, I can tell you that this is quantitative-based market research that I'm going to present. We have surveyed approximately 800 travel consumers in each of 9 international outbound markets plus Canada. And so this is statistically representative, quantitative-based market research. And again, without boring you, this means that we've developed a quantitative-based survey. We've used market research panels, and using a stratified random sampling approach, we were able to then identify travel consumers and then project this up to the national consumer travel population. We have used the UNWTO, or the United Nations World Tourism Organization's standard definition of what a travel consumer is. And there's a little bit of play in how that definition is used around the world. Canada has a slightly different destination, but the definition what we've used is adult consumers in a country that have traveled outbound for leisure purposes internationally from their home country for a trip of 1 or more nights in the last 3 years and or intend to do so within the next year. And that's pretty much the standard definition of a travel consumer that is used whenever you conduct market research. Sometimes we go to subsets or segments of the population, but that's usually based on a segmentation that is being used to kind of narrow down a subset of the audience. These results, now it's based on an opinion survey that you self-select into. So we can't really say that there's a margin of error on this, but the approach that we're taking based on the statistically representative research, we know that there's a plus or minus 2 percentage points whenever we're kind of presenting these types of results. All the figures that I'm going to present are percentage figures. So when I say a number like 19, or you'll see a number like 67, that's a percentage of the total traveler population in each of these source countries that you see here on the right-hand side. I've highlighted Canada only because we were looking at the international travel markets for Canada, but then we added on some extra questions into one of our Canadian surveys so that we were able to then provide that Canadian perspective. So what Canadian domestic travelers think of these kind of service quality issues. So I'm just going to look at the chat because I noticed there's a pop-up that's coming up here. Yeah, okay, so that's a really good question. This is definitely 100% an online consumer survey. It's relatively rare that we conduct telephone-based surveys, especially at an international level, mostly because it's cost prohibitive. And then also, we're finding more and more that the online population is somewhat reflective of the total national consumer population. And we know this because of very high rates of internet penetration, and also because the panels that are used represent, at least from a psychographic perspective, the profile of the national consumer population. So that was a good question. So that's the methodology for the study, folks. It's an opinion-based survey. With opinion-based surveys, there's two things that I want to be cognizant of. Number one is that we're really trying to answer a hypothesis or a set of hypotheses. We're not trying to determine the Cadbury chocolate secret. We're trying to determine, prove or disprove a hypothesis that we have at the front end of the research. And the next thing is that it really tells us a story. Numbers present the raw data, but it's really up to the analyst to kind of interpret what they mean, to kind of determine what that story that we're trying to answer or address. The same point too, this opinion-based research is it's grounded in a static point in time. So the research we conducted was in December, towards the tail end of 2021. So those results, largely speaking, are relatively reflective of consumer opinion for a period of time, and it's anywhere between 3 to 6 months. We've just finished another wave of this very similar research in 23 outbound countries, outbound travel markets, and we have just assessed some of these questions that we surveyed for Tourism HR Canada, and I can tell you that the results are pretty much the same. There's a plus or minus of a few percentage points. So the data here, I think, is really it's relevant for our conversation that we're having around service quality. Okay, so again, Nicholas mentioned that the actual study is available on Tourism HR Canada's website, and that's on the left-hand side. There's an actual landing page that provides a synopsis of the study, and you can actually download it. And then on the right-hand side is we produced an infographic so that you can kind of get the nuts and bolts of what the survey is saying. It provides a very high-level 35,000 feet perspective of the actual results. And I think Heather can get into more details after I'm finished presenting, just to tell you where that actual infographic is. I think it's either shared in the public domain or it will be. Okay, we're going to get into the results. So the first part we're talking about is really the global trends that we are seeing that are impacting travel perception and travel attitudes, and really in this time of COVID. So I'm just going to look at chat again, because I know that there's another question maybe here. That's great. Thanks, Heather. Thanks for posting it. So I've been in this business for about 20 years. I'm one of the very few people in Canada that is pretty much a dedicated market researcher in this space that has operated for this amount of period of time. I don't want to date myself because I still consider myself quite youthful, but I started off my career at Destination Canada in 1999 in the market research and planning department. And I was exposed to these types of issues for my 5-year period at Destination Canada. I then moved on to the Pacific Asia Travel Association to head up their consulting practice in Bangkok, working with destinations all over Asia Pacific. And then I moved on to a firm called GlobeScan, which was originally part of the Environics chain of companies. And again, was very exposed to these issues at the international level in Canada. And then we started 2031, 7 years ago. So I've been in this space for quite a bit of time. I can tell you that when COVID originally started in around January, February of 2020, we knew it was going to be a big issue, but we had absolutely no clue how big that issue was going to be and how important it was going to be, not just for the Canadian tourism industry, but for the global tourism industry. I lived at Destination Canada as an analyst during 9/11, and it was a big shock for Canada. But within a period of time, 6 to 12 months, we saw a rebound in our numbers. I was at Destination Canada during SARS in 2003. Canada was considered one of the most affected countries outside of mainland China and Hong Kong. Huge impact on tourism numbers and yield in Canada in 2003. And then for a period of time afterwards, about 4 years afterwards, before we ended up rebounding to those pre-2003 numbers. We're now in the period of COVID, and we're now 2 years into this pandemic, and it's dramatically impacted our industry. It's impacted local SMEs, and if those businesses are actually going to be viable on a go-forward basis. It's impacted communities, which are highly dependent on tourism inflows, and specifically the dollars that are brought in by tourists and how they recycle within that community. And it's had a huge impact on destinations, Canada included. Our firm works with about 40 destinations at any given point in time, heavy concentration in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. And it's had a massive impact. One of the destinations that we work with, Sri Lanka, they had a huge amount of economic issues and challenges with governance before COVID. COVID just precipitated all of these issues to the point now where it's impacting their ability to purchase and import goods into the country. And so Canada is definitely not spared. This data here comes from Forward Keys and also UNWTO, and it has been synthesized by PATA, the Pacific Asia Travel Association. And it shows, the impact or the decline in tourism arrivals at the international level broken down by regions. And I've put an arrow here to highlight the North American market. So in 2021, they saw an 87% decline in tourism arrivals. And this is the Americas, right? So this looks at the Caribbean, Canada, the US, and Mexico. And again, this is coming off a huge impact in tourism arrivals that we experienced in 2020. So, for all of us that started off this pandemic working in, an analytical role or a forecasting role, we thought things were going to rebound at the end of 2020. And then we recast those forecasts. And we thought, by the end of 2021, things might return back to some level of normalcy. We're now in 2022, and we've just finished Q1. And again, we're going through those ups and downs, really because of those different strains of the pandemic. So I don't want to harp too much on this. We are all living through this, but it's very much been a massive shock to our industry, our economies, and our tourism businesses. At the same point, Destination Canada, Canada's national tourism agency, has been doing a series of forecasting to predict out, when are things going to get back to those numbers that we saw in 2019, which was that banner year for international tourism in Canada. They've put various scenarios. They continue to put scenarios out. We were, before the Omicron variant, we were trending at, a level of recovery back to that 100% level of 2019 numbers by 2025. So, the tail end of 2024, things would likely improve in that scenario with more domestic tourism coming into the mix. These numbers are a little bit dated now because, things are dramatically changing, but generally speaking, we're looking on that upward trend. High degree of pent-up demand by Canadians and international consumers to travel once the conditions allow for it. So we have not given up our wanderlust for tourism. Tourism is such an awesome thing. It's a luxury-based good. We don't need it in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but we need it as human beings, as social beings. We need to experience things with our own hands, with our own senses, with our own sense of sight. We need to be in contact with other individuals. So tourism still has that, that wanderlust of travelers at the international level and Canadians. So that's a good thing. This means that, despite everything that we've seen with COVID, there's still this high degree of pent-up demand to travel. In terms of the scenario now, so at the beginning of this year, we were dealing with this Omicron variant. And, this was definitely impacting our national economies and our international economy. Supply chains have been dramatically affected, which puts, increasing pressure on consumer goods and anything that's really manufactured and transported across borders. So we started seeing inflation increasing. And so there are these economic issues at play. But we thought, what? We're going to deal with this as a society because we're, increasingly we're being vaccinated. We have a lot better understanding of the virology of the pandemic and the science behind the pandemic and how these these issues play from a human perspective and from a health perspective. So we had a lot of optimism, and we thought things would definitely start to change by Q2 of 2022, and then of course the Russian invasion of Ukraine happened. I'm situated here in Berlin, and I'm definitely exposed to the issues, I think, more than I think the average Canadian, because it's in our front doorstep. We're seeing tens of thousands of refugees arrive into Berlin on a daily basis. So it's right there in front and center of you. In terms of how it's impacted the tourism industry, it's just one of those other triggers that changes the perception of travel being a safe thing to do, number one. Number two, it's impacted the economy, and the economy and tourism have that symbiotic relationship. When the economy is doing well, people travel. When the economy is doing poorly, people don't travel. It's literally as simple as that. On the right-hand side, I've just pulled some screenshots of how this has impacted, the tourism economy. First and foremost, huge impact on the European, both domestic, inter-European travel, as well as the perception of Europeans to travel internationally. So huge impact this has had. We've seen across the board severe cuts in travel. From the big OTAs, Expedia, Travelocity, Kayak. Immediate cessation and cancellation of trips. In terms of the destinations that were heavily reliant on the Eastern European countries, Ukraine, Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary, and Russia, huge impact on their destinations. We have a number of clients in the Middle East, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Ras Al Khaimah, and some other destinations, Oman and Jordan. Huge impact on these national tourism economies. Now, really, what does this mean for Canada? So, as Canadians, we are being impacted because, we see what's happening in Europe. We have a natural connection to Ukraine. Many Canadians are of Ukrainian descent. We feel for what's happening to the people in Ukraine, and we see it and we say, this is such a huge, important issue, and our hearts are with these people. In terms of the impact on the travel industry and what it means for the Canadian tourism economy, I think we should likely be prepared for less European outbound travel this year. There's that high pent-up demand for people to want to travel, but at the same point too, the sentiment is quite low because we're seeing this war unfold. So I think we should be prepared for a little bit less European outbound travel than what we were forecasting this time last year. In terms of the complete collapse of two major outbound markets, now Russia and Ukraine are not target markets per se for Canada. Canada focuses on around 12 major international outbound markets. Ukraine and Russia don't happen to be those markets. But it has a major impact on economies that target the Ukrainian and Russian economies: Egypt, Dubai, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Indonesia. And some of those travelers that we target in Canada, that EQ segment, would have thought about traveling to Egypt, Dubai, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Indonesia, etc. So there's the potential for us in Canada to have substitution tourism. And we saw this after 9/11, where Americans that wanted to go to Europe ended up coming to Canada. And we saw this in 2003 with the SARS crisis, that people that wanted to choose Canada chose other destinations. So these are that substitution trips that happen in times of these types of crisis. Now let's get into the travel ambitions, or that pent-up demand, in terms of where we're seeing people and where they want to travel. On the left-hand side are the source markets, or the survey markets that we surveyed, and these happen to be Canada's source markets. So in terms of the next 6 months, we're seeing amongst these source markets here, these 9 source markets, around 60% of the travel consumer public want to travel. And I've specifically highlighted the Americans here because this is a very important international market for Canada. Around 68% of Americans want to travel in the next 6 months. So this is very positive. Despite everything with COVID, a large number of travelers in Canada's international source markets want to travel. With a few exceptions, Australia, the UK, and Japan, we're really seeing a majority of the travel population in Canada's source markets want to travel. So this is a good thing. In terms of where they want to go, so on top, we've got the source markets here, the survey markets. On the left-hand side, we have where they want to go. And we pulled out here, their top markets of where they want to go. And you'll see a bit of a pattern. It's about immediate travel to your close proximity geographic neighbors. And that kind of makes sense. if it's your first trip internationally in the last 2 years, largely speaking, it's the first trip for these people in the last 2 years, just because of the COVID restrictions that were in place. They want to maybe venture a little bit closer to home, right? Because there's still issues that are plaguing the minds of consumers. The whole notion of quarantining back on arrival, quarantining in the destination, if your travel insurance is going to be valid, if you're going to have proof of vaccination or proof of a PCR test, and whether or not you actually have to do a test on arrival in that home destination. So generally speaking, the destinations that are of interest for Australians happen to be New Zealand. For the Chinese market, it's Japan. France, it tends to be Spain, closer in markets, German, Spain, and across the board. And these are the destinations that they're likely or most interested in the next 6 months. Now, 2 flags here. Number one is in the last month or so, China's had this resurgence of the COVID virus, and we are now starting to see that the Chinese outbound market is going to be encouraged once they open up domestically to travel domestically. China has seen their balance of payments skew very heavily to international markets in the years preceding COVID. They want to change that equation and start getting Chinese to travel domestically. Now, China was a big focus country for Canada in 2018, it was the year of China-Canada travel. And then, of course, in 2019, we're going to start having to think beyond China as a major outbound market. It's not to say that we want to stop all targeting of the Chinese outbound market, but it's going to have probably less importance in that portfolio of countries that Canada wants to target on a go-forward basis because of that pressure and those policies that are being put in place for Chinese to travel domestically. So these are destinations of interest. And you'll note the other second point, that Canada's not necessarily in that top list. It's not to say that they're in that consideration set. They are, but not necessarily at that top of mind destination. Now, the story changes in the next 3 years. So where you want to travel, leading up to 2025, the story changes. They want to go a little bit more further afield. And this is because, they believe that, hopefully, God willing, we'll be beyond COVID in the next 3 to 4 years, so that there's a greater interest and a desire to then travel beyond your immediate neighbor countries. So guess what? Good news. Canada pops up into that top 10 list here, and I've highlighted here in orange. The Canadian domestic market. Now, this was a separate study from the international study, but we do have Canadian data because our company does ongoing polling every other month in the Canadian market and 24 major outbound markets. So we were able to add in some of these findings into this study. Now, a Canadian traveler definition is different from the international. Obviously, we're not traveling internationally, we're traveling domestically, and we tend to go a trip of more than one night, plus or minus, depending on the definition, in paid accommodation or not in paid accommodation, and greater than 40 kilometers away from your home base. And this is to try and capture people that are traveling for leisure purposes and not necessarily entertainment. You drive 40 kilometers, you might go to a hockey game and then come back home that night. That doesn't capture you as a traveler. That's day trips from an entertainment perspective. So in terms of Canadians and what they want to do over the next 2 years in terms of travel, at the top, this is total. This is all Canadian travelers, regardless of demographic and province of origin. It's showing here that a majority want to go more than 40 kilometers away from their home, but stay in their province. Kind of makes sense. There's this new wanderlust about traveling within Canada domestically, but at the same point too, a big plurality here, 36% want to travel outside of Canada. And again, it should be no surprise. If Canadians have been largely impeded from traveling internationally over the last 2 years, a few exceptions, obviously last summer and this summer, they want to travel, right? They want to travel internationally. They want to reconnect with friends and family that live overseas or in the US, or they want to start engaging on those bucket list priorities that they had. In terms of how this breaks down from an income perspective, Really kind of no surprises. So, lower income Canadians, and again, the study defines what low, medium, and high are, a majority of them are going to stay domestically within their province and travel. It's that medium and higher income Canadians would be more willing to travel outside of Canada, so internationally. And again, that's very much linked from an economic perspective. I wouldn't say that the Canadian economy is booming, because it's not, but we're not necessarily in recession. We're in that kind of gray space between the two. And really, our economy right now in Canada is heavily stimulated by government funds, and that's really doing wonders for our Canadian economy. It's giving a high degree of perception to be able to spend that money, and that's why Canadians have been, buying homes en masse the last couple of years. But generally speaking, we're probably in for a reckoning in terms of our overall national economy. Okay, we're going to get into service perception issues right now. So we defined service issues, and it's listed in the study with a bit of back and forth with our friends at Tourism HR Canada when we were developing the questions that we were surveying. So in terms of importance of quality service when you travel, and this is domestically, on the left-hand side, these are the source markets. About 42% of travelers, when they're traveling domestically, believe that service quality is very important. So, I'm a Canadian. I'm going to be home this summer back in Toronto and my cottage. If we go from maybe Toronto and go visit our friends in Ottawa, that's a trip that we'll likely do overnight. It's more than 40 kilometers, so it's considered a domestic trip. I want to go for a good meal in Bywood Market. I want a quality type of service with my meal because I'm on vacation, and why not? I should have some level of perception that I'm going to get good quality service when I travel. I've highlighted the Americans here because it's quite high. About 48% of Americans really believe that they should have good quality service when they travel domestically. And Americans are all about service quality, right? I'm pretty much sure they wrote the book on service quality from a domestic perspective. Now, in terms of how this changes from an international perspective, the numbers increase. And again, no surprise. If we're spending a lot of money on a plane ticket, taking time off work, buying a package tour or traveling FIT, we're spending money, we're using valuable time, we expect service quality to be good at a high degree in our international travel destination. So it's a little bit lower domestically, but much higher domestically. And this is the importance of service quality when we travel. Now, in terms of familiarity of travel service issues, the numbers are much less than the importance of overall service quality. And it's because there's so many issues at play right now. There's COVID, there's whether or not I'm going to still have my job, it's the health of the economy, the Ukrainian war right now, all those other issues that play. Can I pay for my mortgage? Where did I leave my smartphone? All those issues come to play. And so when travelers are, thinking of where they're going to travel, there's a whole laundry list of things that come to mind. So, it's actually probably a good thing for us if we're dealing with challenges right now in service quality and service delivery, that the overall familiarity of those issues is relatively low. And, it's a little bit higher for Indian travel consumers. It's quite low for Chinese travel consumers. And Americans are kind of in the middle of that pack there. But again, generally speaking, it's not necessarily a huge issue for travelers when they're traveling. Now, in terms of the importance in selecting a destination, this is what these numbers are showing. So the columns are the source markets, the survey markets we surveyed. And then we've got a bunch of issues at play here in terms of how important they are. They're either extremely important, which is that dark bluey number, and then very important on a 10-point scale at 7 to 8, it's that lighter blue box there. Overall, the visitor experience is so important when they choose a destination. And that's totally common sense, right? We're traveling for a purpose. So we want to have a good visitor experience when we're traveling, either, less crowds if we're hiking, or, get to hug Mickey Mouse if we're at Disneyland, or, we got to see the Mona Lisa when we went to the Louvre. So all that together, it's the overall visitor experience is paramount. However, the quality of the service that we're getting by trained staff is also quite important. It's less important than the overall visitor experience, but it's marginally higher than price and affordability. And so, price is an interesting discussion when we talk about consumer perceptions, because, us as an industry, we tend to be very consumed with the price point of our packages or tours. But generally speaking, consumers are less inclined to state price as an issue when they choose a destination. And there's obviously exceptions to the rule. If we're traveling last minute, we don't want to pay out of the pay out of wallet crazy amounts to travel to a destination. But generally speaking, if we're looking first and foremost at the experience we're going to get, we're less inclined to mention price. But what this data is telling us here is that at least at the total level for all of these countries that we've surveyed, and again, it changes depending on the survey market, that quality service by trained staff is more important in choosing the destination than the actual price or affordability of that destination experience. In terms of the impact of service disruption on the desirability of a country, this is the survey markets here on the left-hand side. It's, if they know about the destination, they're less likely to say that the impact is going to determine whether or not they're going to travel to a source market. And again, as I mentioned, it's all about the visitor experience that they want to have. I've highlighted the American market here. It's showing that the 13% of Americans would not choose a destination. It's agnostic. We're looking at destinations across the board. If they were certain to not get a quality experience in that destination because of service disruption. But, I can tell you that when push comes to shove, with these numbers that we're seeing here, it's showing that it's, not super top of mind for the average traveler. Now, in terms of the breakdown of specific survey markets, now the report breaks it down by all the survey markets we looked at: Japanese travelers, British travelers, German travelers, French travelers. I'm just highlighting here American travelers. So when American travelers are thinking of destinations and that importance of that issue, service disruption, if they know about there being service disruption, it's showing here that about 11% would not choose Canada. So if they've read a Canadian news report, maybe they turned on CBC News because they're getting it from a satellite feed, or they've got friends in Canada that have said, what, you're traveling up to maybe Jasper this summer, and there's no luck that you're going to get a hotel because they just don't have staff at the hotel, or you're not going to be able to get a meal. But it's saying that about 11% of Americans would not choose a Canadian destination. Now, guess what? This is the lowest of all the other destinations that we assessed. So we assessed, a potential trip to France, Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, and the UK. It's the lowest amongst those tested destinations. But, and again, not to contradict what I said before, it's still a little bit substantial. It's saying about a little bit more than 10% of Americans would not choose a Canadian destination if service disruption issues come to the forefront. It's a big major media issue, or, they talk to friends and relatives, and they really find out more about the issue, and they determine that, oh my gosh, yes, there's a service disruption issue in Canada. They're not going to end up choosing that trip to Canada, and they're going to do that substitution trip to pick another destination. Okay. In terms of the seriousness of service disruption, overall, in terms of an issue, that they're evaluating when they travel, from a domestic perspective, it breaks down how big they think the issue is in their home countries. So on the left-hand side are the bars. These are the source markets. Indian consumers, 40% of them think, oh my gosh, yes, service disruption is a big issue domestically in India. Americans say it's about 20%, Chinese say it's only about 5%, Australians about 9%. So this is quite an issue, right? They believe that service disruption is an issue in their own home markets. In terms of Canada, we're looking here at, this is again, the total number of consumers from all those international markets. We broke it down, here by the source markets and the perception of that issue here in Canada. And again, Americans, 14% of them are saying that it's potentially a serious issue in Canada. Now, going back to this previous slide here, the impact of service disruption and whether or not they would choose Canada, they're saying about 11%. So 11% of Americans are saying they wouldn't choose Canada because of service disruption. Now, when we look at this slide over here, it's telling us the perceived seriousness of the issue is about 14% of Americans are saying that it's a very serious issue. So, without getting myself in trouble here, because, there's many other issues at play that I think, the average traveler is thinking of, but it's saying, roughly speaking, around 10%, it's that 10 to 20% of the traveler population, if we average all these countries out, think that service disruption is an issue and it will potentially impact their travel plans. Now, in terms of cross-referencing the two, so the likelihood to select a destination based on the familiarity of the service issues, and again, we are showing the destinations of where they would want to potentially go to, it's showing here that the people that know or have familiarity or knowledge of the issue would certainly not choose the country. And the thing that you want to look at here is this aqua green kind of color. It's showing here that around 13% that believe Canada has, knowledge of Canada having service disruption. About 13% of them are likely then not to choose Canada. And this is averaged out through all countries. And we've broken down the scores in the report itself. And again, I don't want to sound alarmist. I don't want all of you to go back to your daily jobs, or if you're in academia or if you're a student, and be like, oh my God, Oliver at 2031 said that, heaven's going to fall out and we've got major disruption issues with service quality in Canada. We don't, from a perception perspective. But it is in the mindset of international travel consumers. So it's something that is in that mindset. It's not necessarily top of mind, but it's in that consideration set when they're choosing a destination and potentially choosing Canada. Now, in terms of the report, we broke it down by all of the survey countries. So on the top right here, you can see that this is British travelers from the United Kingdom, and it breaks down all of these different issues in terms of the familiarity, prevalence of travel service issues, the importance of quality service when they're traveling either internationally or domestic, the seriousness of the issue in their home country or in Canada, and then it breaks down some other issues here. So there's a lot to really kind of digest in the report. And again, these are all percentage figures, and it's all for your reading pleasure. Now, I just actually realized, and I'd be the first person to point out a mistake in my own report, but while I was developing this presentation, I noticed that there's one little typo in the report. So I think after this, I will I'll send to Tourism HR a clean report removing that typo and get them to put it up on their website that you can download it. And I'll make sure that we do that in the next day or so. So folks, that's the report. There's a heck of a lot of slides and a lot of data in the report. I've just presented you with a snapshot, but I'm really happy to entertain questions. And tell you what, let's treat it as more of a discussion. I'm happy to hear your perceptions, your comments, and if you disagree with the data or if you have something else to add, I'm very happy to entertain it. I'm going to pass it on to Heather, and she's going to entertain or chair the questions.
Thanks so much, Oliver. That was a great presentation. I've just opening up the chat here. I'll just give it a few minutes to see if anyone does have any questions. They can pop it either into the chat area, or we've got the Q&A section as well.
So it's good to see everyone on here, and I'm very happy to ask questions, have anyone ask questions, or if you have any comments.
Well, I'll get us started by saying thank you so much for such an engaging conversation. Your presentation was incredibly thorough. Oliver, we certainly appreciate it, but in particular for me, I think it was the very insightful context you provided. And you so aptly suggested that ultimately, especially with this type of research, with perception sentiment studies, it's what's really vital is the ability to find narratives, to find stories based in the data. So I really appreciate your very strong, insightful context you provided today. What's interesting is I think that we see something you alluded to earlier is that major events can come up and shift perceptions, sometimes in a short period of time. And in terms of what we've found in the past few months, what do you see on the horizon for what we're hoping is a significant recovery period for the industry going into the summer?
That's a really good question. So actually, and I'd be really happy to share another report that we've done, but we produced something called the 20 trends that we think are shaping tourism recovery in Canada and internationally. We published about a month ago, and it's on LinkedIn if you can find our corporate profile on LinkedIn. But I'm actually really happy to share it, Nicholas, with Tourism HR Canada, and you could send it to anyone who was on the webinar today. So a bunch of things, we've actually blocked them down into kind of 4 buckets, things that we thought were issues that were more topical because of COVID, and now they're changing attitudes and behaviors of travel consumers. We're also looking at some trends that we thought were there prior to 2019, but we never really addressed them. And then some issues that have been pushed to the forefront because they were major issues and we never dealt with them. And then COVID happened, and now they're even more important. Just a few things off the top. Travelers tend to be, pretty standard in their approach to how we book and how we go through that traveler path to purchase and how we book travel. Destination Canada calls it the advocacy loop. Some destinations call it the brand funnel. Some call it the decision tree. And that was pretty static, going back to the days of Marco Polo, this is how human beings travel, become aware of a destination, you talk to a bunch of people, you're exposed to media and marketing, you go through that planning process, you either choose to go to the destination or not, you book the travel, you go to the destination, everything's hunky-dory. And that path to purchase journey really hasn't changed. Since I've been with in this business, when I started off Destination Canada, then PATA, and then started the consultancy, we always were kind of pushing that path to purchase journey. It's just changed. Oh my gosh. It's like we are seeing now the booking pattern happening in a much crunched period of time. People demand a high degree of flexibility because plans could change. And it's putting enormous pressures, not just on destination marketers, which we tended to default to as destinations. We're going to not worry about the destination planning or the destination development. We're just going to focus on marketing and let the private sector take care of that. That's now changed. And we're now seeing people, book travel very, very last minute and be very demanding in terms of the whole booking process and all that. We're also seeing longer trips, right? Because if we're willing to go through all the hurdles with travel, getting tests, getting insurance, doing all the research to find out if there's quarantining in place and et cetera, and navigating all of that confusion out there, people want to spend a little bit more time in destination. And I think we're starting to see that. We've also seen this resumption and resiliency in Canadians wanting to travel in our own country. I grew up in Calgary, and then did my high school in St. Catharines in Niagara, and then stayed in Ontario for university, met a girl, she's from Toronto, and stayed in Toronto, right? So, and I was fortunate enough to travel to Banff as a kid. And the amount of people in my neighborhood in Toronto prior to COVID that had been to Banff and West Coast Canada was surprisingly low. And, you know, Canadians tend to travel within their own province. Like prior to COVID, 93% of travel within Ontario were Ontarians traveling within their own province. And now we're starting to see that differently, right? Because we couldn't necessarily travel internationally. So Canadians are more willing to travel domestically. And it doesn't just mean those top 20 destinations like Banff and Niagara Falls and PEI and Vancouver and Montreal and Ottawa. They're willing to go further afield. And this is why we're starting to see those next top 20 destinations coming into their own right. And hopefully this is a good thing for Canadians and a good thing for our Canadian tourism industry.
That's great.
So
Thanks
there's
so
a
much.
lot of other trends,
Yeah,
Nicholas. There's so many
absolutely.
other trends in that report, but
But
I'll
I
definitely
agree
make it
you've
available for
identified
everyone.
some key drivers there. Yeah, thank you. That's great. I see we've had a couple other questions coming.
We have, yeah, thanks, Nick. So the first question is about when was this data collected? Was it collected over time, and how often do you adjust these numbers or reports?
Okay, so that's a really good question. So whenever we do online fieldwork, we try to complete the fieldwork within a period of time because we don't want there to be a bias in the results, you know, because of, you know, geopolitical things happening and changing how people answered the survey at the beginning or at the end. So this survey period was only 2 weeks. Might have been a little bit longer for the Japanese market because their incidence rate of travel has just plummeted because Japanese haven't been traveling internationally over the last 2 years. It tends to take a little bit longer to get certain quotas, demographic quotas, like the 55 age plus. They don't tend to be the people that really want to respond to online surveys. But generally speaking, that data was collected for a static period of time in December 2021 for a 2-week period. Now, do we, the next part of that question is, do we update these numbers? And yeah, the answer is yes. So our company is probably one of the largest market research companies in tourism in Canada. That's an independent firm. So I'm not talking about Kantar and Ipsos. But we do about 100,000 consumer surveys a year, depending on the client and what they want. So I would say, yes, we do track these. So we do track brand perceptions, familiarity of a destination, awareness of a destination, impression of a destination, barriers to travel to a destination, and motivators to travel to that destination. These service quality issues that we're testing here are because we reached out to our friends at Tourism HR Canada to say, hey, we've got some space on our survey. Do you want to tack on some questions? They said yes. And so it was the first time that we're actually assessing these questions. So that question you're asking is awesome because I would love to be able to track these to see how they're going to change on a go forward basis. So hopefully I answered your question.
Thanks so much, Oliver. Next question is, in your survey, did you find anything about labor shortages and travelers
so
making decisions based on this?
Yeah, so we tried to define it as service disruption. And I think we then defined it, and I'll have to pull up the survey question, the specific wording of the question, but I think it was service disruption because of lack of available staff, because we had a multiple prompt type of questions. And so I think we did actually specifically we specifically referenced that. I think in terms of, look, we're in the tourism industry and we know there's a labor shortage, right? You cannot get people. Last summer when I was home at the cottage up in just outside of Huntsville, we go into town in Huntsville and you want to go to a bar or a pub or sit on a patio and it's not open. And it's a Wednesday in Muskoka in the summer and it's not open. You're like, why isn't it open? Because they can't get staff. And so it was really prevalent for people in the tourism industry. You know, I can't get staff. For the average traveler, there's a bunch of other things at play. It's like, do I wear my mask? Do I not wear my mask? Oh my God, I haven't seen my friend in 2 years. There's a bunch of other stuff at play. So for the average traveler, I wouldn't say that they would readily notice the labor shortage issue until it impacts the visitor experience. So if it impacts the visitor experience, that's when they notice the labor shortage issue. And yes, it does have an impact on destination choice and where they're going to travel to.
Thanks so much, Oliver. Yeah, definitely something that we were seeing, even just monitoring media over the past while. Labor shortages, say at Mont Tremblant, definitely impacting people's decisions and their experience once they get there, which then of course has a trickle down effect, right, as to whether they recommend that destination. Great. Well, I haven't seen any other questions come in, and we are just about at the end of our hour. So I will, Oliver, if you have any final statements, I will turn it over to you. And if not, I'll let Nick wrap up.
Okay, yeah, just quickly. So Canada's grappled for a long period of time about having that perception about being an expensive destination for international travel consumers. And, a lot of that is perception, a little bit of it is reality. Travelers are spending a lot of money to come to Canada. And we know that airfares are actually increasing, number one, because of demand, number two, because of the price of oil. So we know that, the cost to travel will increase. And Canada is one of those destinations for our international source markets. It's quite far. And so people have to put, a concerted effort into choosing Canada as a destination. When they come to Canada and attractions aren't necessarily open or they have limited hours, they're getting the wrong meal when they ordered a different way because the server's servicing 50 tables as opposed to 10. That starts playing into the mix. So I wouldn't call this the, stop the trains, we've got to focus on this type of issue, but it's definitely one of those simmering issues there that we are definitely going to have to address as a tourism industry. And it's not just the government trying to have stimulus in play to allow small businesses to hire more people, or we're training more people, or we're allowing people to, come into Canada on a special visa so that they can work in the workforce. It's a whole range of those things that we need to do. But us as a tourism industry, if we're thinking, what are the issues at play that we need to deal with, this is definitely at the very, very, very top of our desk, because it will eventually have a greater impact on people deciding to choose Canada, and then what they're reporting on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and when they're what type of ambassadors they're going to be. Are they going to be a good ambassador for Canada, or are they going to be a negative ambassador for Canada?
Indeed. Well, thank you once again, Oliver. We certainly do appreciate your time today and your many insights you've provided. Thank you to your team at 2031 Consulting. Again, please do feel free to access the link for the report either within the chat. We also have a helpful infographic that's available on our website. That's tourismhr.ca. Thank you to the Tourism HR Canada team, my colleague Heather Elder. Thank you for your help today. And a big thank you to all of you in attendance. Much appreciated to everyone who tuned in from around the world today. So,
okay, thanks everyone. Thanks, Nicholas. Thanks, Heather, and thanks everyone for joining. Have a good rest of your day.